Two friendly democracies, one icy coastline, and a fight over fish. In the early 1900s, British trawlers met Norwegian law on a jagged frontier of sea and rock, and the standoff almost leapt from courtrooms to gunboats. This isn't the Iceland-UK Cod Wars. This is Norway versus the United Kingdom, a quieter clash where maps, livelihoods, and international law pulled two allies to the brink and then pulled them back. Here's how a question as simple as, "Where does Norway's coast actually begin?" became a national cause. How fishermen, ministers, and judges drew lines that still shape the North Atlantic today. To understand the temperature of the dispute, you have to feel the coastline. Norway's shore is not a neat ribbon of sand. It's a maze of fjords, inlets, reefs, and thousands of islands and skerries, forming an outer rock rampart, the Skergård. For centuries, small communities here fished the shallow banks just offshore. Those banks fed families, sustained towns, and anchored a national identity. Fishing wasn't a side business, it was life. When outsiders arrived with industrial gear, Norwegians didn't just see competition. They saw a threat to food, work, and the rhythm of the coast itself. For long stretches of history, British fishermen gave the inner Norwegian coast a wide berth. That changed around 1906, when modern trawlers, fast and powerful, pressed close to Norway's intricate coastal waters. With them came anger and incidents. Local fishermen, using smaller boats and traditional gear, felt outgunned. Norwegian authorities began drawing firmer lines to protect inshore grounds. This wasn't an abstract legal exercise. It was a reaction to steel-hulled vessels dragging heavy nets across the same banks where small boat fishers had worked from time immemorial. The fuse was lit. If you ask, where do a country's waters start? Most places point to a clear shoreline. Norway could not. The land doesn't stop at the water's edge. It sprawls outward in broken fragments, some permanently above water, some barely so, creating natural corridors and inner passages that locals had used for centuries. Norway argued that its true coastline, for legal purposes, ran along the outside of these islands and skerries, the outer skerry-line, and that waters tucked landward of that protective fringe were essentially Norwegian internal waters, or at minimum, within a special fisheries belt. The UK countered that such a method would give Norway too much sea, to the unfair exclusion of others. The dispute wasn't only about fish, it was about how to draw the map itself. After years of friction and failed talks, Norway acted. On the 12th of July 1935, a royal decree drew straight baselines across selected points along the outer skerries in the far north, then measured a 4 nautical mile fisheries belt seaward from those lines. Inside that belt, foreign fishing was off limits. From Norway's viewpoint, the decree simply recognized geography and history, a broken coast that made straight baselines practical, and local use that gave those waters a special character. To British officials and trawler owners, the decree looked like a leap outward, one that crowded them off grounds they believed were part of the high seas. World War II froze the dispute for a time, but the thaw came fast. In the late 1940s, Norwegian patrols enforced the decree against returning British trawlers. A considerable number were arrested and condemned in 1948 to 49, and tempers rose with each seizure. Newspapers spoke of national honor and livelihoods under attack. The UK faced political pressure from coastal constituencies. Norway faced the same from its own. Everyone could see where this kind of cycle sometimes leads at sea: escalation. Instead, the two governments took a narrow, disciplined path, one that required patience from fishermen and politicians alike. The UK sued Norway at the International Court of Justice, ICJ, in The Hague. The ICJ case boiled down to two core questions. First, could Norway legally use straight baselines drawn along an outer line of skerries when defining its coastal waters for fisheries? Second, even if the method was unusual, had Norway used it consistently over time in a way other states had tolerated? On the 18th of December 1951, the ICJ ruled in Norway's favor. The court upheld Norway's straight baseline method, given the special geography of the Norwegian coast and the long-standing consistent practice that other states had effectively accepted. It also accepted that Norway could reserve a 4-mile fisheries belt measured from those straight baselines. In short, the court said, the map can fit the coast, not force the coast to fit the map. For Norway, it was a vindication of a centuries-old relationship between people and their sea lanes. For Britain, it was a legal defeat that demanded restraint, no easy thing after years of friction and recent arrests. But the judgment gave both sides something priceless: clarity. If you step away from the legalese, the combustible mix is obvious. On one side, a distant water British fleet under economic pressure, ranging further for catches and backed by political voices at home. On the other, Norwegian coastal communities who saw industrial trawling near the skerries as an existential threat. Add arrests at sea, national pride, and hard headlines, and you have the ingredients for a confrontation. What stopped it? Partly the memory of war, partly mutual interest, but mostly the existence of a court both sides trusted enough to ask and then accept an answer from. The ICJ judgment gave a face-saving exit. Britain could say the law was against it. Norway could say the law was with it. The ship stood down. The fisheries case did more than end a bilateral quarrel. It became a landmark for coastal baselines, teaching later negotiators and judges that context matters. Coastlines aren't all the same, and the law must handle rugged, island-fringed shores differently from smooth ones. Decades later, as countries moved toward wider maritime zones, and eventually exclusive economic zones up to 200 nautical miles, the logic of baselines, where you start measuring from, remained fundamental. The Norwegian example, validated by the court, echoed through textbooks and treaty talks alike. Because this story involves Britain, fish, and the North Atlantic, it's easy to blend it with the Iceland-UK Cod Wars of the 1950s, 1970s, episodes that featured ramming, net cutters, and Royal Navy escorts. The Norway-UK dispute peaked earlier and ended in court, not collisions. That difference matters. It shows how legal institutions can cool tempers when livelihoods are on the line, if politicians and fishermen accept the forum. The reverberations didn't stop in 1951. In 1977, inspired by the global move toward 200-mile zones, Norway created a Fisheries Protection Zone, FPZ, around Svalbard, the Arctic archipelago governed by the 1920 Svalbard Treaty. That treaty recognizes Norway's sovereignty, but also grants nationals of signatory states equal rights to engage in certain activities, including economic ones, on the islands. The question that lingers: do those equal rights extend to surrounding seas, especially once you talk about vast EEZ-style zones that didn't exist in 1920? Norway says its FPZ is a pragmatic, conservation-minded regime under its sovereignty. Some EU and UK actors have pressed back at times over quotas and interpretations. The result is a managed friction, periodic disputes and lawsuits, but no war. In a sense, it's the fisheries case lesson in slow motion. Geography is complex, law tries to match it, and diplomacy keeps the pressure below boiling. Norway's aim was straightforward: protect inshore fisheries that sustain small coastal communities and reflect the coast's reality on legal maps. The fear was that without strong baselines and a reserved belt, industrial trawlers would erode fish stocks and wipe out local livelihoods. Britain's aim was access, keeping routes and grounds open for a powerful trawler fleet under economic stress. The fear was that if Norway's method stood, other states might copy it, shrinking the high seas through creative cartography. These aims weren't evil or irrational, they were rational in tension. And because both nations were committed to rules, if also to their fishermen, they could funnel that tension into law rather than violence. Courts don't fish, but they do weigh facts. The ICJ looked at Norway's long, consistent practice of treating the outer skerries as the effective coast, the special geography that made a conventional low watermark unrealistic, and the acquiescence of other states over time. That combination mattered. International law often honors well-established, openly applied practice, especially where nature makes neat formulas unworkable. The court also stressed non-excessive use of straight lines. Norway wasn't drawing wildly, it used lines that hugged the nature of its coast, and the 4-mile fisheries belt, modest by today's standards, fit the era's understanding of coastal rights. The judgment thus said, in effect, Norway's method makes sense here, and it has behaved this way consistently. Others knew and largely accepted it, therefore it stands. Almost war doesn't mean fleets exchanging fire. It means the ingredients for escalation were present. Repeated seizures of trawlers, angry headlines, politicians under pressure, and ships operating in tight spaces with competing orders. In the late 1940s, you could imagine a patrol cutting a net, a captain refusing to heave to, a collision in heavy seas, each a spark. The decision to walk into a court, accept its jurisdiction, and then accept its answer was the off-ramp. It's easy to take for granted, but it required discipline from ministers and fishermen alike. The story didn't end with a judgment. It matured into co-management. As the law of the sea evolved, Norway and later the European Communities (EU) built agreements to share and steward North Sea stocks. By 1980, an EU-Norway fisheries agreement set the frame for annual bargaining. Quotas, access, and joint management for shared species. It's not romance, it's routine. Spreadsheets, science, and seasonal talks. But routine is what replaces crisis when institutions work. A short timeline. 1906, modern British trawlers reappear close to Norway's coast. Incidents begin to mount as Norway moves to protect inshore grounds. 12th of July 1935, Norway issues a royal decree drawing straight baselines in the far north and reserving a 4-mile fisheries belt for Norwegians. 1948–49, Norway arrests a number of British trawlers, tensions spike. 18th of December 1951, the ICJ rules for Norway, upholding straight baselines in the 4-mile belt given Norway's geography and practice. 1977, Norway creates a fisheries protection zone around Svalbard. Quota disputes and interpretations continue into the present, usually managed diplomatically. 1980, today, EU-Norway fisheries agreements formalize annual quota sharing and access, proof that yesterday's disputes can become today's routines. Why this story still matters? First, it shows that geography and livelihoods can collide with abstract lines on a chart, and that the way we draw those lines changes real lives. Second, it's a reminder that international law isn't just treaties on a shelf. It's a living system that can head off conflict when states choose to use it. Third, it foreshadows the Arctic. As ice retreats and activity rises, the region will test how well maps and law can keep pace with reality. The Norway-UK fisheries fight is a case study in how a country frames a complex coast, defends local livelihoods, and still ends up cooperating with its neighbor once the rules are clear. Takeaways for today's viewer. Lines matter. A baseline on a map can preserve a village's catch or push a fleet farther from home. Courts can cool the sea. The ICJ verdict gave both sides clarity without humiliation. Cooperation follows clarity. Once the baseline fight ended, Norway and the UK, via the EU framework, moved from confrontation to annual management, something that benefits stocks and fishermen in the long run. If you enjoyed this dive into the moment when Norway and the UK almost turned fish into a fight, hit subscribe. On this channel, we tell the stories where map lines, coastlines, and human lives collide, and how the arguments of yesterday still shape the seas of today. Next up, Svalbard's strange treaty, the 200-mile revolution, and why Arctic fish can cause diplomatic headaches. Stay tuned.